undertook some research as part of a British Council-funded project that was exploring the skill needs of science journalists. And the project was a collaboration between the UK and India initially, where we were looking at particularly the way in which science communication is developing in India and the way in which it's developed in the UK, and thinking about joint and mutual learning, particularly focused around teaching and how we might teach postgraduate students in science communication. Not surprisingly, one of the topic areas that came up from that preliminary work with journalists was artificial intelligence. And so myself and my colleagues were thinking about, well, how can we find out, what are the needs and what science journalists are thinking about in relation to artificial intelligence. And obviously we were sitting here in the UK and in India, and we actually thought, it would be really interesting to broaden this out a little bit and to actually think about different contexts. And so at that point, we got in touch with Louisa Maserani because we felt that Brazil would be a nice complementary case to the UK and India. So we set about, the three institutions, set about developing a questionnaire based on what we knew already of the ways in which science journalists were adopting artificial intelligence technologies. And that's not just generative AI. We were actually thinking also about things like translation software, transcription software, which many journalists are using. So we implemented then a primarily quantitative survey. So we were asking mainly for rating questions, how strongly do you agree or disagree with a statement, to try and understand how journalists felt about artificial intelligence technologies. And also we asked sort of multiple choice type questions to understand what tools they were using already, to get a really nice picture of the journalists and the technologies that they're adopting, or where they're seeing that the technologies are not compatible with their roles, essentially. In terms of what we found, it was really quite interesting because we found really widespread adoption of what you call maybe the older artificial intelligence technologies, perhaps things we don't even think about as being artificial intelligence. So the transcription software I mentioned, grammar checkers, those sorts of things, which actually all of us use because they're often embedded in many of the word processing packages that we use anyway, right? A grammar checker is usually embedded in word processing packages. We also are seeing some areas where there is evidence of early adoption of more sophisticated tools. So in India, for example, there was more use of tools for things like data mining to try and understand stories. We don't know why, but there is some suggestion that India is positioning itself as a leader in this sort of area in terms of technologies. And the government is really pushing the adoption of AI technologies, which isn't always well received by journalists. But nonetheless, the kind of cultural context, if you like, there is one around technology leadership. In Brazil, we saw actually a wide range of slightly more sophisticated tools being adopted, tools that could analyze large data sets, but also tools that might be used to help you identify trends in big data, or tools that would help with generation of story ideas. And we didn't really see these tools being adopted, certainly not in the UK. And perhaps to a lesser extent, some of those tools were being adopted in India. So we really felt that in Brazil, there was perhaps a more openness and a more positive attitude towards AI technologies, more sophisticated AI technologies. So we sort of felt there was definitely distinctions between the countries in terms of what kinds of tools they were willing to adopt, with the UK expressing a more pessimistic view of AI technologies. If we looked at the media landscape in the UK has been quite negative towards AI tools. And in particular, there's been a lot of concern around job losses and the potential impacts of AI as replacements for humans as a big narrative in the UK. So we did see across the board some concern about job losses, but it was significantly higher in the UK than in other countries. The concerns that the journalists were expressing, they seem to really link to fundamental values that are related to journalism. Journalists are expressing concern about accuracy, transparency, and objectivity within AI tools, particularly when you start to get to generative AI. I think this is where this applies a bit more. And they're saying that that's not compatible with their role as a journalist. So I think there was a sense in which some kinds of AI are currently incompatible with both personal and institutional journalistic values. So I think that pretty much summarizes what we found and how we did it.